Have you ever had a strange and unexplainable experience, such as seeing a ghostly figure in a haunted house? Or maybe you've seen apparitions from the corner of your eyes? Well, if you have, you're not alone. In fact, over the last few years, many people have documented cases where they've encountered what is known as shadow beings. And these beings, they seem a little different than your regular ghosts that come at us from an old haunted location, because often these encounters are very physical. Their characteristics are that they're organized, they observe you, like there's 1,000 eyes watching you in the room, and they seem to follow people around. Well, for this very special Halloween edition of Otherworldly Stories, I thought we'd talk to my friend, paranormal investigator Mike Ricksecker, who has not only encountered them himself, but he's written a book about them, and he's currently creating a docu-series that goes into this subject deeper than it has ever been looked at before. Mike, can you tell us about what happened when you first encountered the shadow beings?
I often get asked what is my most terrifying paranormal experience. And, being a researcher like this and being an investigator, I dive headlong into these, very, very curious. So the time that actually was more frightening to me was when I wasn't out there investigating and researching. I was completely caught off guard during a very, very personal moment. This happened down in Salisbury, Maryland. And like I said, it was very, very personal. And I was down there essentially to talk a woman off a ledge. She had parked her SUV and was sitting in her SUV back behind her old childhood home, which was long since abandoned. So I drove all the way down there. It's a very, very dark area. It was a dark night. There's no street lights on that street. And there are these tall woods back behind the house. So I park in the driveway, walk back to her SUV, and I get in. We're talking for a little while, but I start noticing as we're carrying on with the conversation, I'm looking in the side mirror, and these short shadow entities start coming up to the trunks of the trees in the woods. And as we continue talking, and more of these continue to come up to the trees. And she sees that I noticed something, and she says, you saw something, didn't you? I'm like, yeah. And I told her what I had seen. She started looking out her window too, and more and more of these were just gathering there. And finally, one of them actually came up to the back of her SUV, and that's when I said, I think it's time we ought to go. And she agreed, so we were going to meet up somewhere else. I got out of her SUV. I did not notice the shadow person that was directly behind it, that had come up to it, but in the trees, there were still more of these that were gathering there. And I started walking to my car, and this is when I saw something really bizarre. Up in the treetops above these shadow entities was this very unusual white spiderwebby type of thing. I'm not even sure what to call it, that started slinking its way through the treetops. And so I got in my car and we met up somewhere else. But it was a moment that was very dark, very heavy, and it caught me off guard. And I could say, yeah, that one kind of creeped me out a bit.
I can understand why it would. Many years ago, when I would come across these shadow being stories, I would always dismiss them. I'd say, well, that's very interesting. People talking about shadow beings and these large figures with these hats and strange anomalous activity that would go on, until I had my own experience. I'd say about 13 years ago. I was coming back to a place I was living in at the time, and it was in the afternoon. It was on a Saturday. I remember that much. I come back into the master bedroom where I was staying at this one place. I enter the room, and behind the door in broad daylight, there were these three beings that started to move towards me slowly. And it was their presence, Mike, and I know you could probably relate to this from the story you were saying. It wasn't that it was evil, but it had this ominous presence of this substance that they were made of, that I could literally feel it and see that the shadow was kind of like a denser sort of, I want to say, that it was like a substance that they had. And so as it came towards me, I backed up onto the bed, and I'm like, you have to leave. I was like, get out of here. I was like pale as a ghost. I wasn't sure what to do. And as I did that, there was this physical interaction from them. I heard this click that took place where the light switch over on the side that was for the walk-in closet in the bathroom that were adjacent to it, it clicks off. And it was just like very dramatic. And my heart was racing. I could feel it. It's still with me to this day. I don't want to call them ghosts. It wasn't some sort of apparition. It wasn't just a regular run-of-the-mill thing. These beings are strange. So from what I gather, I would almost put them in another category that's different than your typical ghostly or spirit encounter. Would you say that's true, that they're almost in a multi-dimensional category?
Yeah, I would agree with that. The ones that I call a quote unquote true shadow person are something more interdimensional. Now, there are shadows that we witness that are simply a human spirit trying to manifest as an apparition, can't quite do that, and they only come off as a shadow. But what we call a true shadow person is certainly something that is interdimensional, that has traversed here from some other plane of existence. And some of these, they seemingly are able to stay here in our dimension. They know exactly what they're doing, whether they are trying to interact with us. My very first one, it actually, came right up to my bed when I was about 8 years old, grabbed me by the wrists, crossed my arms, crossed my body, and ran off down the hall. So it had some sort of intention there, definitely physicality. Others stand there and watch us, observe us. And then yet others, it seems like that we almost mistakenly cross paths with them. One time when I was investigating a restaurant, walk into the kitchen, and this shadow just quickly darted right across the room. What was interesting is that you heard it bang, bam, right into this flimsy metal door that was on the side of the kitchen that waiters and waitresses just carry large trays of food through. And the crazy part about it was, even though you heard it slam right into it, the door didn't move at all. So this became the crux of a lot of the research that I had started to do. And what I came to discover was that really what had happened here, at least according to me, is that when I walked into that room, that entity and I, our planes of existence crossed. Maybe there's some sort of time slip even, we don't know. But somehow, some way, its dimension and my dimension crossed. I was able to see it for a split second. Maybe it saw me as a shadow. I don't know. But apparently I scared it because it took off. And perhaps on its plane of existence, it blew right through that door and it opened wide. But on my plane of existence, I didn't see that because we're in two different dimensions. However, you could hear the sound of it in that slam, and sound being on a different wavelength, a different frequency, is able to traverse the dimensions differently. And we talked about this a bit on the Alaska Triangle with that missing Douglas and the radio chatter that came back through the portal. It's very, very similar.
That's what I love about you, Mike. And for people out there that know your work, or maybe some of you have just discovered Mike's work, is that you bring in this very scientific side to the work also, that you don't just look at it on the surface. It's not just topical with you. You're looking at, okay, where are these images coming from? Are we seeing this outside of the infrared? Are we looking at this from, an empirical, scientific, measurable angle? Can we look at the auditorial aspects of it? Can we measure the electromagnetic frequencies? I like that. It's coming in from every angle. And I think that's what we do have to do. We have to look at this, and we have to be sometimes more pragmatic, but at the same time, you have a great depth of research, your own experiences, and the knowledge that comes into this, as people have seen on the Alaska Triangle where you're there. Now, with that being said, Mike, going into this from a more ancient historical perspective, we have stories about ancient civilizations, such as even in the Babylonians, where they had a way of transitioning to a place called the Plain of Sharon. Most certainly even into the Egyptian areas, as you will be joining us next year for that incredible tour in Egypt, where you're going to be doing a lot of your discoveries and research there also, when we're there for the Return of the Kefir Cycle tour. I'm excited that you're going to be able to measure these things and actually look at where everything comes together and put these mysteries into a greater picture. But with that being said, I'm kind of thinking that not only is there a place different than our spiritual realms, but this is not the same as the afterlife, but this is this multi-dimensional spectrum where maybe these people have figured out a way to observe our world, perhaps even steer the events of our world. And, perhaps that this could be where some of our extraterrestrials reside also. Do you think that there could be an extraterrestrial component to this with the shadow beings?
I do believe that some of these shadow entities could possibly be extraterrestrials, whether they're traveling here interdimensionally from wherever they reside at, across the astral plane somehow. They're able to travel great distances here, or perhaps, they're even still local here to our system. And there's even, ideas that, they could be, if their craft is, above our planet somewhere, they're coming down here and utilizing some sort of cloaking device that maybe they don't quite understand the physiology of our eyes, and the cloaking device doesn't entirely work. And so we end up seeing it as some sort of shadow, or even a shimmer or something like that. So yeah, there could certainly be a extraterrestrial component to all of this, and certainly interdimensional.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never talked about this publicly before, but friends of mine who are members of certain fraternities, they're secret societies all over the world with all sorts of different traditions. They often describe that when they go to lodge meetings, that there are these more ancient beings that appear as shadow beings that are very neutral feeling, that are in the background sort of observing. They're very tall shadow beings. Now, we also hear of this typically that they are observing people, or they're seen with very interesting characteristics. But that's what's great about how you're coming at this, because to date, Mike, I've heard people talking about shadow beings, but I've never encountered somebody who has gone in more in depth into this subject than you are. I know you're producing and creating a new docu-series about this, which everybody has to watch out for. And if you don't mind, you have a book behind you, A Walk in the Shadows. Can you grab that book and hold it up for us? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. A Walk in the Shadows, Complete Guide to Shadow People, came out earlier this year, and it is, to me, it's really the tip of the iceberg on all of this phenomena. But everything that we've been talking about so far is in here. We got into a little bit about ancient history. I have a chapter in here on ancient history. Extraterrestrials, they're in here as well. So a lot of different ideas of what these shadow entities could possibly be, and where we'll be going in the future, which is the docuseries that you mentioned, The Shadow Dimension, which will be coming out here in a few months.
And that's fantastic. And of course, everybody wants to look out for the new docu-series. But in the meantime, go on Amazon or to your local bookstore, if it's open, get Mike's new book, buy it, read it, review it, give it 5 stars, of course, because you know that it's an incredible book. And most certainly keep an eye out for everything this man does. Mike Ricksecker, I want to thank you so much for coming on here today and sharing your story on this Halloween episode. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, they can find me at MikeRicksecker.com or HauntedRoadMedia.com. I also have the YouTube channel, Haunted Road Media, which has over 700 videos on there right now. There's also Edge of the Rabbit Hole, which is the podcast. It also has its own YouTube channel, so youtube.com/Edge of the Rabbit Hole. But you can also catch that on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, where we interview wonderful people like Johnny. So, yeah, you can find me all over.
Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Happy Halloween.